Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace, unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. Learning to make big decisions for our joy, our progress, our careers, our lives is something that we are constantly encountering within our 20s. And here to elaborate a bit more is my good friend Ruth.
Hi, I'm Ruth.
And what's something it's an impactful lesson that you've learned in your life so far?
I would say this is like a basic lesson, but it stuck with me for a while. So my dad told me that in any kind of situation where you need to make an instant decision, think of the things that you would regret if you wouldn't do it. So that's one lesson that I always remember.
I want to say thank you so much to Ruth for bringing this to my attention. I feel that I'm constantly engaging in making decisions every single day, and I feel like all of us are anyways, what to eat, what to clothes to put on, what shoes to wear, at what point are you supposed to actually get out of bed. But when I was listening to Ruth speak, I didn't see that in this context necessarily, but more in the context of when you're engaging in making decisions about new experiences that you're going to have. And because she talks about you don't want to have a life with regrets. And I've realized that I too do not want to have a life with many regrets. And I want to have a life that I lived, a life that I experienced things in it, whether that be like concerts, festivals, or traveling the world, backpacking, going on solo trips, or whether that just be something as small as like staying in, learning to cook like a new dish. I want to experience the world and experience it for myself in a way that I'm going to be able to enjoy it, in a way that I can be happy in it. But I find myself, at odds, or I guess having a hard time sometimes understanding which decision to take and what choice to make, because it's scary. Yeah, it's scary. It's unknown. It's not something that I've done before. And I feel like I have to deal with more definitely the consequences now more than ever. I mean, you're making these decisions most likely on your own. You also have to understand if you're going to be able to pick yourself back up from it. And so I just wanted to dig a bit deeper into this because I want us to become decision makers, confident decision makers. I want us to be people who, when we engage in choices in our lives, we're doing so intentionally. And we're not just there because the opportunity fell into our lap. And so I thought that going a bit more into what it actually means to make a decision, especially at this point in my life, would be really important. Also just for me to remind myself of, maybe a little checklist to have, because I know when I have to encounter making these large choices for myself, even if that's not in terms of experiences I want to experience that are supposed to be fun, but maybe it's education, or when it comes to my relational life, I do have usually a sense of panic, and I feel a lot of anxiety, and I kind of want to help us to improve our our resilient toolbox basically, and learning how to make decisions with kind of a guidelines, or giving ourselves guidelines, I think will definitely help with that and will allow us to engage in better opportunities and better experiences that also align a lot with us. So let's get into it. But before I get into really I guess more on the context of what I want to talk about in terms of when we're making decisions in scenarios that we have never had experience in, let's focus on what decision making is. So according to psychology has identified basically two different systems. So you have system 1, which is when you're making fast, intuitive decisions. And then you have system 2, which is all about being a bit more slow, going more slowly into the process. You're being a bit more deliberate and a bit more logical about it. So we're focusing more on today on refining our system 2. And although we're going to focus on system 2, it's important to understand what's impacting us in system 1 and also just impacting both systems in general. And what influences how we make decisions are our cognitive biases. And so cognitive biases are basically these mental shortcuts that we use to inform our decisions. So for instance, there's multiple different ones, but I have three as an example. There's like confirmation bias. So you might favor information that supports your pre-existing belief. There's also the availability heuristic, which is you rely on immediate examples that come to your mind. And then maybe there's also like the anchoring bias. So you rely heavily on the first piece of information that you've received. And I want to say that having these mental shortcuts, they're there to help us. They're there to inform us. They're there for a reason. But you do have to be really mindful about the fact that they do exist, because most of them are based off of our prior experience and our prior knowledge. And as great as that is, I feel like when you're engaging in different contexts and new situations, and I feel especially when there's like a lot of opportunity like available or potential to have a lot of opportunity, sometimes these can hinder you. And naturally, I'm not saying to ignore them all the way, but just to take that into consideration. And that's why I'm saying we should go a bit more slowly into this process and a bit more mindful into this process when we're making these decisions. Other aspects that can also impact you definitely when you're making decisions are your emotions. So as an example, if you have like anxiety, that can maybe lead you to risk aversion. And maybe if you have a lot of excitement, that allows you then to make impulsive decisions a bit more quickly. And again, your emotions are giving you feedback for a reason. You need to understand, the physiological response your body is having to the information that was just presented. There's a reason that's happening. You need to get to the why of it. And the way that I usually do this is I do try to, first of all, identify what I'm feeling at the time. And then I'm usually able to track down like, okay, usually when I feel anxious, it's because I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to, achieve my goal, for instance. And the reason why I feel like I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to achieve this is because I currently don't have the capacity, or might not have all the resources, or I'm seeing that this is going to impact us. But now I at least know why I feel like this, and that I'm kind of thinking a bit more ahead. Safe to say, or like coming back to what I want to say with this, is that you still should look into your emotions, and at the same time, sometimes, when you're going into these unknown situations or into these new situations, I mean, it's a new situation, it's unknown. So yeah, maybe you do feel a bit anxious, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for it. And so again, taking a bit more time to be a bit more mindful, maybe journal about what you're feeling, journal about how other prior experiences are definitely going to shape like how you look forward and move forward. And there's also even decision matrices you can look up, and maybe might also help you to just, again, slow down the process a bit and really understand what decision is going to be best for you. And now I think these tools and what we already naturally have, they're great. I mean, that's how I'm able to be here and I've survived this long, and they are worth noting down just for the sake of them, just so you can understand also like maybe why you've made the decisions you've made in the past, if you haven't taken the time to do that before, so that like, okay, this is why I'm in this place right now. And at the same time, like I've said, I feel like they can sometimes limit us in some sense when we're engaging in new contexts. And when I'm engaging in something new, what I usually do is I ask and I look around people who are around me and I ask, oh, have you had this experience before? Because then maybe your experience can help me. And I think that's great to do. I often ask my parents because they're a bit more mature. They're mature. Mature is maybe not the right word, but their experience, they've gone through their 20s. And so I can ask them, okay, what should I be doing? But this is my life. Also, I saw this thing on like Instagram. It's like this trend where it's like your parents tell you like, oh, I've been in your position, but they've never been like in the club till 5 a.m. with free bottles, partying with their favorite artists. And so that's just an example. But even if they've been in like a similar situation at a time, like it's still your experience. You're interpreting it in a different way. You know, you might have different consequences to face, different outcomes. And so, not to disregard, you know, what they've gone through, but sometimes I don't necessarily want what they want. And I know our parents most likely want what's best. I say most likely because I know that's not the case for every single person, but I know for the majority part, like our parents want what's best for us. But at the same time, like I also want to learn how to make my decisions on my own. And likewise, you know, even if it's not your parents who you're looking towards, or maybe it's just other persons, as great as it is, and you know, go to them, ask them for like advice, yes. I don't know. I also want to be able to, again, make my decisions on my own. And I know that we're all operating from different spaces and different mindsets. And I think that's really also important to take into consideration, because sometimes we don't also value the same thing. And so you might see an experience as something that would dilute my life or like diminish my life. But for me, I see it as an opportunity of a lifetime, or I see it as something where I can truly see myself growing or just having fun in. And maybe that's what I value the most. And that's where this comes in, or this comes in, where that's where this episode comes in. And that's where I come in. Because even though I realize our own systems lack the experience to give ourselves a bit more feedback when we're making these decisions, I think even presently, just by looking at our values, our priorities, and our capacities, we're able to already establish some type of system that will give us feedback, even if it's not based off of past experiences that are going to be a bit more similar to the scenarios that we're encountering. And so, what do I mean by this? I want you to, well, you can do this, of course, after the episode, but what I mean by this is that when we sit down and we really draw out, you know, what it is we value at that time, and maybe we can do this like every 4 months, but what we value at that time. So for me right now, I value making money. So normally, or what I've realized is that if I see that there's an opportunity available that will maybe hinder me from making money, I'm not necessarily so keen on taking it, because what I value at the time is making money, you know? And I know that sounds really surface level, but also I'm in my 20s and I would love to be able to afford different experiences, different clothes, you know, I would love to be able to just afford the lifestyle that I would want to have, you know? And then when it comes to like your priorities, that's another thing. And it also definitely ties back into your values. But for me, the way I could see this or give an example is like my education is a priority. And so if something is going to come in the way of my education, like for example, today, I really wanted to go to Amsterdam, but because I knew that I had like a deadline for this assignment that is coming up, I knew I had to stay in, and I know I had to go to the library and focus on that because that's one of my priorities. Moreover, then we come to our capacities. And I think this is something that I say that a lot. My friend Salem will say that. I say that a lot, especially. But what I mean by this is asking yourself how you're even doing at the time. I feel like especially if the engagement or the experience is going to require a lot of energy from you, then asking yourself, okay, are you tired right now? Do you have the energy? Because otherwise, you know, it's not really worth it sometimes, the experience, if you're also just going into it without like maybe the full energy. And at the same time, I mean, that's why caffeine exists. So go for it. But just kind of taking into like consideration how you are physically, but also how you're doing mentally. You know, if a lot of other aspects or things are going on in your life, then maybe right now is not the time to engage in this opportunity. And maybe sometimes that's exactly what you need, but it depends person to person. And I think that when you sit down with yourself and you're actually able to, you know, note these 3 different aspects and, you know, have that kind of like already checklist in the back of your head, and you can bring it to the forefront when you're making these decisions, you are then cultivating like a life that also aligns better with you and aligns with your values. And so then when you're making these choices to kind of engage in new experiences, you're making them based off what aligns with you. And that doesn't mean it's always going to work out in the way that you had expected. I mean, sometimes the outcome will just always fall short, and that's natural. It's always kind of happens. Like some things, they disappoint you sometimes, but at least you didn't waste your time on something that didn't really even matter to you. Or I don't know, you might have in the past just gone into it just because of like the fear of missing out, which I 100% understand. Oh my goodness. I feel like in my first year of uni, I definitely had fear of missing out. If there was a function going on, I had to be there. But then I keep saying I feel like, but after some time in my second year, I realized I didn't really have to be at every single function. I wasn't missing out. What really mattered to me was maybe, getting the job that I wanted at the time, or focusing on my studies, or sometimes I would stay in when it just came down to the fact that like I wanted a night for myself and I just really wanted to be in tune with myself a bit more. And so when you also like draw these maps out for yourself and have these like lists for yourself, if you're someone who is prone to that feeling of fear of missing out, then yeah, it might still sting a bit that you didn't go to something or that you said no. But in the end, at least from my experience, when I do go to things that I only went to because of that fear of missing out, I always come back and I'm like, why the fuck did I leave my house? Why did I do this? And as I'm growing older and I am, I'm stepping into rooms where there's so many opportunities. I know there is, and I know there are so many opportunities. And whether that be, again, in terms of different contexts like professions, education, or just fun and enjoyment, like, I know that I also want to understand, really what aligns with me, because I want to have an intentional life, and that is, a big part of the Uncomfortable podcast, but it's also just a big part of me. And so having these guidelines is always really good so that you can actually cultivate a life that you stand by and that you agree with. And even if your values change, which they do naturally, at least at that point, at that point, you're going to have different things and then different decisions to make. So that's not too bad. That's not too bad. And lastly, I'd also like to say, because Ruth mentioned the word regret, so I do also think sometimes the easiest questions you can ask yourself is just like, would you regret it if you didn't go through with this? Would you regret it if you didn't go through with this? I mean, honestly, it's what takes a few seconds to ask, takes a few minutes maybe to answer, but maybe that's also something that you should include in your checklist as you're making these decisions. And then another thing that was a couple months ago was asked to me from my therapist, right? I was making a risky decision, sending a risky text. And she asked me, before I sent it, because I ended up going through with that decision. Didn't have the expected outcome, but fine nonetheless. She asked me, would you look back and regret it in 5 years? And the first thing, when she told me this, especially because this was in a context where I had a lot of emotions involved, I looked at her and I was like, what the fuck are you saying to me right now? Like, this is not the advice that I expect from my therapist. What do you mean, And as simple as a question it was, it did get me to think, obviously I have this kind of like version of myself that I think I'm going to be in 5 years. And I know whatever is in my head most likely will not be it. I'm hoping it's going to be better. At the same time, it might just be different. But it did get me start thinking. I'm like, fuck, because there's already now, I'm 21. Already now at 21, I can look back at certain decisions I make, and I can say I regret the fact that I didn't do this, or I regret the fact that I didn't fucking move forward with something, or move forward with an idea. And the fact that I can already say that right now, bruh, I don't want to continue that. I don't want to continue with that. And so I did ask myself that question, and I was like, oh, fuck, if I don't do this, yeah, 26-year-old Shanae might have a word to pick, or like might have something to say to me. And so I ended up going with the decision, ended up going through with sending like a risky text. Didn't have the expected outcome, but it was fine nonetheless, because I think a bigger part of when you're making these decisions in contexts that you haven't been in yet, it's all about learning to trust yourself. That's really all what this is, and trust not just that you're making the right decision, but trust that you're able to pick yourself back up from it if it's the wrong one, or if there are consequences to it that you didn't expect or that you didn't plan for. And I've talked about this already in episode 18, which is all about self-doubt and self-trust. But I think, we rely a lot on people, on external people and like their opinion or like their guidance. And I think that's great. It's great and wonderful to have a community. But it's also so important to realize you're able to support yourself through the good decisions you make and through the bad decisions that you make. And making decisions, living life, it's all just a learning experience. And so when I also just kind of reframe my mind to understand that this decision is not going to be the end all be all of it, I'm going to be able to pick myself back up. And even sometimes just looking at other people's lives and like understanding that they've also made mistakes, or, they've made the wrong move at times. I think you just start to like get better at picking yourself up. You get better at making these decisions and understanding, oh shit, maybe this is not going to be the right thing for me at the time. And in that sense, you get better at understanding yourself. And again, that's what this is really all about at the end of the day. And so coming to an end, because I don't want to continue to repeat myself, because I know I have a fucking habit of doing that. We talked a lot today about making decisions and understanding that your past experiences definitely shape, how you're going to be moving forward, your emotions that you're feeling, that they do. But also, even if you don't necessarily have, the right feedback or like the right quote unquote experiences to propel you into making different decisions right at this point in your life, you still do have different aspects. You still do have like a great understanding of yourself, or you can find a great understanding of yourself through looking at your values, through looking at your priorities, through understanding your capacities, through also just asking yourself, what are you going to regret if you look back at this in 5 years? Or are you going to regret something if you don't do it in 5 years? And so we do actually have a lot of tools available, safe to say, that we can be using right now. And again, you might make the wrong decision, but you'll also learn how to pick yourself back up. And if you're someone who oftentimes is someone who is asking like a lot of people for advice, then I think those people will also be there to help you pick yourself back up as well. To have that community is also something that's just so great. And so, you have yourself, you have people. And if you don't have people, don't worry. We're going to get to an episode on how to actually create not just friends, like find friends, but also create a community. But I don't know. I just think that we have a lot of tools available. We just have to start practicing with them. We have to start giving ourselves a bit more credit as well that we'll be able to manage. And we have to start to allow ourselves to experience different things and new things, and fuck it. Some of the things that I've experienced or that I've done, I used to I'd be like, when I hear people do that shit, I'm like, the fuck are you doing? What the hell? Okay, I wasn't going to give too much of an explicit example, but there was one time I made a decision. I had 20 minutes to get ready for it, but it was a Wednesday night. There's this famous South African DJ, Uncle Waffles, and she was performing in Hamburg, right? But she hadn't posted on her Instagram that she was going to be there. So everyone was like, it's a scam, and I just come back from shopping. I had finished my exams, I had finished my studies. And I was like, should I do this? Should I go? I was like, bro, I should go. And so I went. And it's not something I would normally do in the past, going to the club on a Wednesday night. But I was like, fuck, you know, I do want to be more spontaneous. That's something that I'm maybe not doing so well at right now, but that's something that I do want to do. And so I ended up going there. I don't even know how the fuck we made it in. We made it in, saw her. She was majestic. She was just majestic. But I had a great time. I had such a lovely time. And I was like, you know, this is something that I would have looked down upon in the past. But now I'm like, fuck it, we ball, you know? So I'm also definitely seeing the benefits of, kind of moving through the motions and understanding myself a bit more and wanting to experience life and really, wanting to experience life. And guys, before I continue to go on a tangent, because I really have a habit of doing that, I want to say thank you guys to listening to today's episode. I want to say thank you to Ruth for the inspiration for it. Ruth was actually the person, one of the people who I went with to Uncle Waffles, and so had a lovely time there. Yeah, but guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next week, bye. Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Uncomfortable Podcast. Make sure to tune in every Monday for a new episode on Spotify and YouTube. And go ahead and check our Instagram and TikTok for more content. Bye!